All right, welcome everyone to today's Google Search Central SEO Office Hours Hangout. My name is Joe Mueller. I'm a search advocate here at Google in Switzerland. And part of what we do are these office hour sessions where people can jump in and ask their questions around the websites. And we can try to find some answers. I have a bunch of things submitted on YouTube, which we can go through. But it also looks like we have a ton of people raising hands. So let's get started there. Let's see. Isabel, you're up first.
Hello, good morning, everybody. My question is about the crawling of our website. We have different number from the crawling of the Search Console in our server log. For instance, we have 3 times the number of the crawling from Google in our server, and in Search Console we have one of the 3 parts. Could be possible, maybe we have something wrong or we don't identify bien the Google bot because the numbers are different.
I think the numbers would always be different, just because of the way that in Search Console we report on all crawls that go through the infrastructure of Googlebot. But that also includes other types of requests. So for example, I think the ads bot also uses the Googlebot infrastructure, those kind of things. And they have different user agents. So if you look at your server logs and only look at the Googlebot user agent that we use for web search, those numbers will never match what we show in
But
Search
we
Console.
have more in our server log than in Google Search Console.
OK, if you have more in your server logs, then to me, that would sound like either you have multiple sites combined in the server logs, or you're also counting requests by other people who use the same user agent. So the user agent isn't something that is locked and only limited to Googlebot. Anyone can say, like, I am Googlebot, but even if they're not Googlebot. So there is one way to double check that with the IP address. And I think we have that in our Help Center, how to kind of double check that it's really a Googlebot.
OK. OK. Thank you.
I would double check that.
OK.
Cool. Gaurav.
Hey, John. I have a question in mind. We have a website, and from last 3 to 4 months, we have been working on Google Web Stories. It was going very well till last month, 5th March, actually. We were having some around 400 to 500 real-time users coming from Google Discover on our web stories. But suddenly we saw a instant drop in our visitors from Google Discover, and our Search Console is not even showing any errors. So what could be possible reason for that?
I don't think there needs to be any specific reason for that, because especially with Discover, it's something that we would consider to be additional traffic to a website. And it's something that can change very quickly. And anecdotally, I've seen that or I've heard that from sites in these office hours, that sometimes they get a lot of traffic from Discover, and then suddenly it goes away, and then it comes back again. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing anything technically wrong. It might just be that in Discover, things have slightly changed, and then suddenly you get more traffic, or suddenly you get less traffic. We do have a bunch of policies that apply to content that we show in Google Discover. And I would double check those, just to make sure that you're not accidentally touching on any of those areas. That includes things, I don't know offhand, but I think something around the lines of like clickbaity content, for example, those kind of things. But I would double check those guidelines to make sure that you're all in line there. But even if everything is in line with the guidelines, it can be that suddenly you get a lot of traffic from Discover, and then suddenly you get a lot less traffic.
No, I didn't mean that. Not suddenly we got it. we are having it constantly for almost 3 to 4 months from when we started working on web stories. 400 to 500 of real-time visitors we had. We didn't change any part of our content or what we call. We didn't try anything new over there. Everything was as we had done before, but we saw an instant drop.
Yeah.
Not even that it got less and less. Instantly, there were no visitors.
Yeah, anecdotally, that's what I hear from people, that it goes from you get a lot of traffic and then suddenly it goes to almost nothing.
Okay.
Sorry, I don't have any kind of better tip in that regard. I think Discover is something that is worthwhile trying out and seeing what you can do there. But it is something, because of its nature, it's not tied to specific people searching. So it's a lot harder to kind of work on it and have it in a persistent state.
Okay.
Cool. OK, Ritu.
Hello, sir.
Hi.
I'm audible to you.
I cannot hear you so well, but maybe it will get better.
Now I'm audible.
A little bit, yeah.
Sir, I have a question related to old domain to like when we redirect any old domain to new domain, and this time for the backlinks we are creating for the old domain, is there they are auditable? Like when we audit, when we create, when it will redirect to new domain. After that, if we audit the old domain backlinks which we created for old domain, that will be auditable.
I think they would show in Search Console. I mean, in Search Console, you would see a sample of the links to your website. And if they redirect through another domain, then I think we would still show that in Search Console. Sometimes I think we show that in between state, that it's like you have a link through this other website.
Okay, in the option like link. But after redirection, is it possible? Then we redirect to a new domain. Like we can view for the old domain also.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so sometimes sites change domains. I would not recommend doing that regularly. I think every domain move that you make, it brings challenges and possible problems. But if you need to change your domain name, that happens. Yeah.
So one more question, like my website, some spammy website are regularly copying our content, like spammy, like which having very low domain authority. That type of websites are copying the blog content. So we are doing like manual for delisting those URLs from Google SERP. We are just manually submitting the request to Google by the form. You know, after that, our URLs are delisting from Google SEO. But is it the right way to get rid from these type of activities, or we can go for any alternate option for this? Like in further, we will not see such type of spammy activities for on our website.
How do you mean alternate process?
So, like very spammy, like which is having very low authority, toxic backlinks. We are getting so many toxic backlinks. Like most of the websites are copying our content. Our whole content is copying on our website. And when we are delisting them from Google SERP, we are submitting the request to Google. Then they are manually removing their domain from like Google SERP. So is it the effective way to get rid from these type of activities, or we can go for any other alternate option or any paid or free option which
Yeah.
is available? We can opt.
So I think if another site is copying your copyrighted content, then probably the DMCA form I think that you're using is the right way
Yeah,
to go there.
yeah, we have taken the plan also earlier, but for a limited time because plan is very expensive for it. So that's why we are thinking we should delist the URLs manually. So we are thinking if we get any other option like for this instead of premium plans.
I don't think we have any kind of paid plans or anything like that.
Okay.
So the DMCA process, if that applies to your case, that should be something that is available for free. You can just use it directly in Search Console, or I don't know, wherever the form is. So that might be one approach. The DMCA process is a legal process. And I can't give you legal advice. So you might have to check with a lawyer to see if it's appropriate. The other thing that you could do, if you wanted to, is to use the disavow backlinks tool if you're worried about those links. For the most part, if it's a random spammy site, I would not worry about it. I would not use the disavow backlinks tool because it's just extra work.
There will be no effect of toxic backlinks on our website.
No,
Like,
I can't imagine. No.
Okay. So one more question. Our website is going through migration process. So we have followed checklists which we should consider before migration process, and we followed and we worked on it. And instead of that, we are worried about that. Certainly, like we will get a traffic loss for the website. Is there any chances we'll get a traffic loss? A website will have a traffic loss in small amount or like.
It's always possible. So with migrations, when you're moving from one domain to another, there's always a period of fluctuation in between. And usually, if you're following the guide that we have, then it's a minimal fluctuation, but it can still happen.
Is it enough to which checklist we are following, which are available in search engine land, search engine? Is it enough for it, to get rid from traffic loss, like minimal amount of traffic loss, please?
Yeah.
Is it enough for it, or we should go?
We have a checklist in the search developer documentation for site moves, and I would double check that.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir.
Sure.
For your answer.
John, I'm sorry to interrupt, but can I offer Ritu another suggestion here about the DMCA? And much like you, I'm not offering legal advice, but there is another path, another remedy that you can take, which is you can find out who the host is. There's a site that I believe is called whoishostingthis.com. You can find who the host is. And they generally have a department that you can reach out to with an email address such as legal at whatever the name is, or abuse at. They have these departments, and you can reach out to them and say that someone is infringing on your content, but you need to give them backup documentation. Generally, they will not ignore this. There's an area of law called safe harbor. In which that means that hosts can't moderate everything that they're hosting, but if they're told enough times about infringements and you give them legitimate documentation, they're almost bound to take it down. The problem is that sometimes becomes a game of whack-a-mole where people change hosts, but it takes time, and eventually these people, if they are infringing on your content, they'll give up and they'll stop doing it.
So thank you so much for your response. Can you share the link with me on chat box for this, which you share? It would be good for me.
Cool. Yeah, that definitely also makes sense. Let's see, Joseph.
Yes, hello, John.
Hi.
We have a content publishing website since 2009, and we experienced a bad migration in 2020, where we encountered a huge drop in organic traffic. So the question here is that we had a lot of broken links. So we used the 301 redirect to redirect these broken links to the original articles. But what we did in robots.txt, we disallowed these links so that the crawling budget won't be gone on crawling these 404 pages. So the main thing here, if we fixed all these redirects, if we redirected to the same article with the proper name, can we remove these links from the robots.txt, and how much time does it take to actually be considered by Google?
So if the page is blocked in the robots.txt, we wouldn't be able to see the redirect. So if you set up a redirect, you would need to remove that block in the robots.txt. With regards to the time that takes, there is no specific time because we don't crawl all pages with the same speed. So some pages we may pick up within a few hours, and other pages might take several months to be recrawled. So that's, I think, kind of tricky. The other thing I think worth mentioning here is if this is from a migration that is 2 years back now, then
Yes.
I don't think you would get much value out of just making those 404 links kind of show content now. I can't imagine that would be the reason why a website would be getting significantly less traffic. Mostly because it's I mean, unless these pages are the most important pages of your website, but then you would have noticed that. But if these are just generic pages on a bigger website, then I can't imagine that the overall traffic to a website would drop because they were no longer available.
Okay. Another question about the optimal content length on a page. You know, we have encountered many blog posts that talk about, let's say we need to have around 100 or 1,000 words per page. So what's the optimal content length?
I don't think there is one. So some pages are very short, some pages are very long. It kind of depends on the amount of information that you want to give users.
There is this term propagating now, the thin content. Is it applicable by Google or not?
Usually that applies more to the overall website. So it's not so much that one page doesn't have enough content. It's more that the website overall is very light on actual information. So I wouldn't use the word count as a way to recognize that. I think sometimes the word count is useful for you to look at a larger website overall and to try to find areas where maybe you could be doing better. But I wouldn't use it as a metric to guide kind of like the specific things that you do on a website.
Okay, thank you so much.
Sure. Rob.
Hi, John. Thanks for the time. My question pertains to, it's a crawling question pertaining to discovered, not indexed. We run a two-sided marketplace since 2013 that's fairly well established. We have about 70,000 pages, and about 70% of those are generally in the index. And then there's kind of this budget that crawls the new pages that get created, and those we see movement on that so that old pages go out and new pages come on. At the same time, we're also writing blog entries kind of from our editorial team, and to kind of get those to the top of the queue, we always use this request indexing on those, so they'll go quicker. We add them to the sitemap as well, but we find that we write them and then we want them to get on to the Google as quick as possible. As we've kind of been growing over the last year and we have more content on our site, we've seen that sometimes doesn't work as well for the new blog entries, and they also sit in this discovered not indexed queue for a longer time. Is there anything we can do to like internal links or something? Is it content based, or do we just have to live with the fact that some of our blogs might not make it into the index?
Yeah. I think overall it's kind of normal that we don't index everything on a website. So that can happen to kind of the entries you have on the site and also the blog posts on the site. It's not tied to a specific kind of content. I think using the inspect_URL tool to submit them to indexing is fine. It definitely doesn't cause any problems. But I would also try to find ways to make those pages kind of as clear as possible that you care about them. So essentially, with internal linking is a good way to do that, to really make sure that from your home page, you're saying, like, here are the 5 new blog posts, and you link to them directly so that it's easy for Googlebot, when we crawl and index your home page, to see, oh, there's something new, and it's linked from the home page. So maybe it's important. Maybe we should go off and look at that.
OK, so if it's linked from the home page, it's more likely that Google sees it as important than if we just add it and it kind of gets added on a sub blog page.
Yeah.
OK.
Definitely.
OK, that helps. Yeah. Thank
Just
you.
making it as obvious as possible for us to figure out.
OK, to see that.
There's also, usually, if you have a blog section on your site, you also have RSS feeds. And if you have that set up, I would also submit those to Google in Search Console, just because RSS feeds tend to focus more on the newer content. And that kind of helps us to pick those up a little bit faster. So we use them similar to sitemap files, but sometimes RSS feeds are a bit easier for us to pick up.
OK, that's a good hint. I can implement that on the Google Search Console side.
Cool.
Cool. Thanks for your time.
Sure. Rohan.
All right. Hey, John, thank you so much for taking on my question here. So I'm one of the moderators at Reddit. And ever since GPT-3-based AI writing tools started to get advertised, our community is having a debate over whether or not to use them. Although our stance is mostly against it, but we are trying, or maybe I should say, we are struggling to see what is Google's official position on the same. Someone had posted on Reddit if they should be using these AI content writing tools, to which you responded no, but you had no further explanation to it. And then you had also posted some cryptic tweets about it. So I'm just trying to understand more that how does Google react to websites hosting AI written content? And what is your suggestion for all of us?
Yeah. So for us, these would essentially still fall into the category of automatically generated content, which is something that we've had in the Webmaster Guidelines since almost the beginning, I think. And people have been automatically generating content in lots of different ways. And for us, if you're using machine learning tools to kind of generate your content, it's essentially the same as if you're just, I don't know, shuffling words around or looking up synonyms or doing kind of the translation tricks that people used to do. Those kind of things. My suspicion is that maybe the quality of content is a little bit better than kind of the really old school tools. But for us, it's still automatically generated content. And that means for us, it's still against the Webmaster Guidelines. So we would consider that to be spam. So
just a quick follow-up on that. Are you saying that Google is able to understand the difference between human and AI content?
I can't claim that. But I mean, for us, if we see that something is automatically generated, then the web spam team can definitely take action on that. And I don't know how the future will evolve there, but I imagine, like with any of these other technologies, there will be a little bit of a cat and mouse game where sometimes people do something and they get away with it, and then the web spam team catches up and kind of solves that issue on a broader scale. But from our recommendation, we still see it as automatically generated content. I think, I don't know, over time, maybe this is something that will evolve in that it will become more of a tool for people. Kind of like you would use machine translation as a basis for creating a translated version of a website, but you still essentially work through it manually. And maybe over time these AI tools will evolve in that direction, that you use them to kind of be more efficient in your writing, or to make sure that you're writing in a proper way, kind of like the spelling and the grammar checking tools, which are also based on machine learning. But I don't know what the future brings there.
So you are saying currently it's not there yet?
I mean, currently it's all against the Webmaster Guidelines. So from our point of view, if we were to run across something like that, if the web spam team were to see it, they would see it as spam.
Got it. Got it. Thank you so much.
Sure. All right, Viola.
Yes, good morning. I would like to ask you, does using an HTML tags such as span or class into an H1 can affect my website from a SEO point of view?
I don't think so. I mean, my understanding is that we would still see that as a heading. And as long as it's a valid heading, we would be able to use that. I don't know from a technically kind of valid HTML point of view if that's still the correct way to do a heading. But from our point of view, we would probably just see that as a heading.
OK, so it's not a problem if I want to make animation for my H1, I use a span class because we think that our website go down in the ranking for this reason and others in reality. So that I don't know if maybe it's better to have a clean H1 without anything inside, or
I think I can't imagine that a website would drop in visibility because of
OK.
Yeah.
And my second question is, does a low rating mobile results on Google PageSpeed, like LCP, FID, might have affected our website rank after the introduction of the new algorithm last summer? Because we were like the fourth around my city, OK, if I check a web agency or a keyword that we... so after the introduction of this algorithm and going on Google Search Console, we find out that these parameters like LCP, FID for mobile has a bad rating like 48, not for desktop, that is 90, so it's OK. So could be this the problem of our...
Could be. It's hard to say just based on that. So I think there's maybe two things to watch out for. The number that you gave me sounds like the PageSpeed Insight score that is generated, I think, on desktop and mobile. Kind of that number from 0 to 100, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. We don't use that in search for the rankings. We use the Core Web Vitals, where there is LCP, FID, and CLS, I think. And those are based on, or the metrics that we use are based on what users actually see. So if you go into Search Console, there's the Core Web Vitals report, and that should show you those numbers, if it's within good or bad, kind of in those ranges.
But if I go on Google Search Console on Core Web Vitals, OK, it said to me that the data from the last 90 days are not enough for this type of device.
OK. Yeah. OK. Then in that case, it's not due to that. So we have to have enough data that we can collect from users to be able to understand the status of the Core Web Vitals for the site. But especially for smaller sites, we might not have enough data. And then we would not use that as a factor there. So even if the PageSpeed Insight score is bad, that isn't something that we would use. We would only use it if we really have data from users that tell us that it's actually slow in practice. So I would use that score as a way to kind of prepare for when you have more traffic and have those numbers, but it wouldn't be the reason why your website would drop.
Okay, so we have to find the reason in another way. Okay, I understand. Okay, thank you very much.
Cool, sure. Let me go through some of the submitted questions, and I have more time afterwards to go through like all of the people with the raised hands as well here. So stick around. Let's see. The first question I have here is, does it make a difference if a navigational link is visible on desktop but hidden on mobile? Can eventually non-visible navigational links be considered less relevant as visible ones? So I suspect by hidden on mobile, it means it's not removed on mobile, but rather just not visible directly. And as long as the link is within the HTML of the page, for us, that's fine. For crawling, we can still pass signals to those links. All of that is fine. If, on the other hand, the link is not even in the HTML on mobile, and we crawl the site with mobile-first indexing, then we would not see that link at all. So that's, I think, the important distinction to think about there. You can check this in Search Console with the inspect URL tool to try to fetch that page and to see if in the HTML the link is actually still there. If the link is there, then that should be fine. We have some shortcuts on our website. So these are some German shortcuts like IDR or UA or ZBSP. Oh, it's so awkward to read these German shortcuts in English. Is this readable for Google, or should we avoid shortcuts on our website? So from kind of from a practical point of view, if this is something that you're trying to rank for, then I would make it as clear as possible what you're trying to rank for. But these are essentially just shortcuts that you would use in writing on a normal page. And the content that you want to rank for is essentially not the shortcuts, but kind of like what's around the shortcuts. And from that point of view, I would not worry about this. If this is normal language usage, then it is what it is. It is what users expect. They can read it. They can understand it. And that's essentially fine from our point of view. We're seeing competitors showing up in search results with aggregate rating and high price, low price, rich results used on e-commerce product category pages. Based on the documentation, it looks like this is not an approved use case. So I wanted to check and verify if I'm understanding the documentation correctly and if this is something that we should be working on as well. Yeah, and unfortunately, not everyone implements things the way that we have it documented, whether that's on purpose, that they're doing things in ways that we don't want them to do, or whether it's accidentally just implemented incorrectly. It's sometimes hard to tell. But if you're looking at the documentation and it's clear to you how you should be doing it, then I would try to do it that way and not kind of the way that we say not to use it. So especially for category pages, I think our guidance is still that you should not be using this kind of structured data there because it's not the same product. It's a bunch of different products. So I would try to avoid that. We recently started a chat tool as a help service. The button is a small bubble in the bottom left corner on mobile. It covers a bit of content because the bubble is an overlay. Will we have a ranking problem because of a usability problem? Should we have an additional close button? The bubble is visible on all pages, also when users change pages. So I don't know about the usability side. I can't really give you advice there. But with regards to kind of search's general ranking guidelines there, I think there are two aspects that could come into play. And it's something where you probably have to make a judgment call on your side. On the one hand, there is the intrusive interstitial guidelines that we have. where if you have an interstitial on your pages that is intrusive for users, then that's something that we would recommend avoiding. That's a part of the page experience ranking factor. And it's something where we don't have like a fixed number of pixels or anything like that, which we would say would be intrusive. And my guess is if you have a chat bubble in the corner, then that would not be considered intrusive by your users. The other aspect is around the core web vitals. So in particular, I think the LCP and maybe the content layout shift, so the time it takes to load the page and if the content shifts around while that page is loading. Depending on how you have implemented this kind of chat bubble in the corner, that might be something that would be playing a role. And that's something which probably you can test, where you turn that on and off, and you try it out in your browser to see what is the effect there. The effect that you see in your browser is kind of a different effect than users might see, but it gives you a bit of guidance. So in particular, for Core Web Vitals, we use the metrics that users see, which we call field data, in the Chrome User Experience Report. And if you test it yourself, we would consider that to be lab data, which might be slightly different than from what an average user would see. Primarily, this is due to maybe the different connections that users have, or different devices, the capabilities, how fast they are, how much RAM they have, those kind of differences. But usually, if you turn it on and off, you will quickly see, is there an actual difference or not? And if there is a difference, then you kind of have to make a judgment call. Is this something I want to worry about or not? Or maybe it's something that you just track for a while to double check. So those are kind of the two primary things that come into play. Another one that we've seen in the past, which is kind of a weird edge case, specifically around these chat things that sometimes run with JavaScript in the corner, is that oftentimes they will use the page title as a way to signal that actually there's a chat message waiting for you. It'll add something like a 1 to the page title if some chat operator is waiting for you to kind of chat with them, essentially. And if you use JavaScript to change the page title, then that is something that we could pick up when we render the page. And we have seen cases where suddenly all pages of a website have a 1 attached to the title, which comes from one of these chat tools. So that's something to watch out for, and maybe turn off if you have a chance to kind of adjust that there. Let's see. In Search Console, we have Search Appearance Filter that shows AMP articles that appear in search. That's all fine, but the URLs that appear under AMP article filter are non-AMP URLs. Does Search Console show the canonical for those URLs, or is this a reporting issue? So in general, in Search Console, we do try to show the canonical URLs in the performance report. It's not 100% perfect, because there are certain kinds of URLs that we report on slightly differently. But we do try to show, for the most part, the canonical URL. So I would not be surprised if you see the canonical URL in the general performance report on AMP. I believe there's also a separate AMP report, which you can double check. But I'm not sure if that's there or not. I don't know. Confused right now. But that might also be one place to check. But in any case, I would not see that as kind of an issue on your side. If we're showing the canonical URLs there, that's kind of the way we wanted to do that in Search Console. And again, it's not 100% consistent, because some types of search appearances we show the way that we show them. Sometimes they also include the hash in the URL if we're kind of including a link to a specific section of a page. So it's, I would say, to a large part canonical, but not 100% sure. Let's see, question about crawling. I recently redesigned my website and changed the way I list my blog posts and other pages from pages 1, 2, 3, 4 to a View More button. Can Google still crawl the ones that are not shown on the main blog page? What is the best practice? If not, let's say those pages are not important when it comes to search and traffic, would the whole site as a whole be affected when it comes to how relevant it is for the topic for Google? So on the one hand, it depends a bit on how you have that implemented. A View More button could be implemented as a button that does something with JavaScript. And those kind of buttons, we would not be able to crawl through and actually see more content there. On the other hand, you could also implement a View More button essentially as a link to kind of page 2 of those results, or from page 2 to page 3. And if it's implemented as a link, we would follow it as a link, even if it doesn't have like a label that says page 2 on it. So that's, I think, the first thing to double check. Is it actually something that can be crawled or not? And with regards to kind of like if it can't be crawled, then usually what would happen here is we would focus primarily on the blog posts that would be linked directly from those pages. And I mean, it's something where we probably would keep the old blog posts in our index because we've seen them and indexed them at some point. But we would probably focus on the ones that are currently there. One way you can help to mitigate this is if you cross-link your blog posts as well. So sometimes that is done with category pages or kind of these tag pages that people add. Sometimes blogs have a mechanism for linking to related blog posts. And all of those kind of mechanisms add more internal linking to a site, and that make it possible that even if we initially just see the first page of the results from your blog, we would still be able to crawl to the rest of your website. And one way you can double check this is to use a local crawler. There are various third-party crawling tools available. And if you crawl your website and you see that, oh, it only picks up 5 blog posts, then probably like those are the 5 blog posts that are findable. On the other hand, if it goes through those 5 blog posts and then finds a bunch more and a bunch more, then you can be pretty sure that Googlebot will be able to crawl the rest of the site as well. To what degree does Google honor the robots text? I'm working on a new version of my website that's currently blocked with the robots file. And I intend to use robots text to block indexing of some URLs that are important for usability, but not for search engines. So I want to understand if that's OK. That's perfectly fine. So when we recognize disallow entries in a robots text file, we will absolutely follow those. The only kind of situation I've seen where that did not work is where we were not able to process the robots text file properly. But if we can process the robots text file properly, if it's properly formatted, then we will absolutely stick to that when it comes to crawling. Another caveat there is usually we update the robots text files maybe once a day, depending on the website. So if you change your robots text file now, it might take a day until it takes effect. With regards to blocking crawling, so you mentioned blocking indexing, but essentially robots text file would block crawling. So if you block crawling of pages that are important for usability but not for search engines, usually that's fine. What would happen or could happen is that we would index the URL without the content. So if you do a site query for those specific URLs, you would still see it. But if the content is on your crawlable pages, then for any normal query that people do when they search for a specific term on your pages, we will be able to focus on the pages that are actually indexed and crawled and show those in the search results. So from that point of view, that's all fine. Let's see. For example, Fireworks is one of the products and services that Google considers dangerous and that you should avoid in your ads and destinations. Do such terms also affect the ranking of business website that legally offers such products? So from a Google search point of view, I'm not aware of kind of a list of products that we would consider to be problematic. I do believe on the Google Ads side, there are certain products where the ads team, for whatever policy reason, doesn't want to allow advertising for, but that's completely separate from Google search. And from at least from what I'm aware of, if you mention these things on your website, they can appear in the normal search results. There's nothing really blocking that. And you definitely see that if you just try to search for fireworks. You will find sites that sell you fireworks. Let's see. We're about to launch a new e-commerce site, and we're debating on how many pages we should initially go live with. Since it's a new domain, I'm worried a bit that Google will only index a small portion of the website at first. What would be the best approach here? So I think we have this covered in our e-commerce documentation, actually. We looked at this with a variety of teams, and I think everyone had like a different idea of which approach to take. And I think we have maybe 3 options or so covered in the documentation. So I would double check that. It depends a little bit on what you want to achieve and how that should happen. Also, with regards to e-commerce sites, if you're trying to get these products into Google Merchant Center for Google Shopping, I think it's still called Google Shopping, then you might have different considerations than if you're just launching a website on its own. But the documentation that we have for e-commerce sites, I would definitely check that out. Let's see. There's just one question I want to grab quickly before I switch over to you folks again, because it's like you're so patient. Thank you. And it's a long question, but I'll just take the first part to make it a bit easier. So it's a food blogger. And the first question is, Google said that there's a maximum of 16 words that you can use in your alt text. And the question is kind of like, does Google read the rest of my alt text? And like, what does this mean for usability? And I think the important part here is we don't have any guidelines with regards to how long your alt text can be. So from a Google search point of view, you can put a lot of things in the alt text for an image if that's relevant for that particular image. When it comes to the alt text, we primarily use that to better understand the image. So if someone is searching for, I don't know, in Google Images for something that kind of matches the alt text, then we can use that to understand that your image is relevant for that alt text on that specific page. That's kind of the primary use case of the alt text. We do also use the alt text as a part of the page. But to me, that's usually something that is already visible on the page anyway. So it's less something that is critical to the page itself. So I would really use it as something that applies to the image. And I would use it for usability reasons and for Google Images to better understand that specific image. And I think what might also be worth mentioning is when it comes to Google Images, you don't necessarily need to describe exactly what is in the image, but rather kind of like what this image means for your particular page. So if you have a picture of a beach, you could use an alt text and say, oh, this is a beach. But you could also say, this is the beach in front of our hotel. Or this is the beach that we took a photo of when we were doing a chemical cleanup. And kind of those intents are very different. And people would be searching in different ways in Google Images to find more information there. And kind of giving that extra context always makes sense, in my opinion. OK, lots of questions left. I'll try to add some comments as replies there as well. But maybe we'll switch over to some live questions. And I have a bit more time afterwards, too, if any of you want to stick around. Let's see. Shun, I think you're up next.
Hi, John.
Hi.
And I have a question that will be a little bit similar to the one you answered earlier, but it's regarding HTML and JavaScript, the classic one. And let's say I have an HTML with there are some parts which is hidden by CSS display none. And when a user first land on the page, that is hidden for some reason, UI reason, to simplify the UI. And that hidden contents can be only seen when a user click the button, and then the JavaScript runs, JavaScript click event runs, and JavaScript change the status of the CSS. And then the user see the contents. So my question is, it looks a little bit gray zone for me, because that since the Google can never run any JavaScript events, So I wonder if the contents which is hidden by CSS when a user first land on a page can be the target of the Google evaluation or not.
It can still be indexed. So
Uh-huh.
that's something. If it's in the HTML itself in the DOM when the page is loaded, then we can use that for indexing. If it's something that needs a JavaScript event to then fetch something from the server and then display that, then that's not something that we would recognize. But if it's in the DOM, if it's in the HTML, and it just goes from being hidden to visible, that's perfectly fine.
Mhm. Okay, so is the variation would be the same as the one that is not hidden, or?
Probably. I mean, it's always hard to compare like how things will rank in kind of in the end. But my assumption is that it would be pretty much the same. I think it's also something from a user point of view you might want to watch out for, and that's more kind of like when someone goes to your web page and after it's being shown in search. And that is essentially that if you're promising the user something, it's a good idea to show the user that when they go to your web page. So we apply that when it comes to things like intrusive interstitials or kind of like too many ads on a page. If they go to your page, they should be able to find what they were looking for. And if this is additional content that you're providing, which is not kind of the primary reason why they're going to your page, then that's fine. That's kind of like a usability way to give more functionality to a page. However, if the primary content is blocked like this, then that's something where I would expect the users to be a little bit unhappy if they go there and they don't realize, oh, this is how I get that piece of information.
Okay, so what would the case that only when we see the contents to the user from the PC and never can see the contents from the smartphone? With actually the element itself is embedded on HTML, but hidden, and the user can never have a chance to undo the hidden.
I don't think we would separate that out. Because sometimes that's also just a usability mechanism that sites use, where you have essentially a responsive design, and within the responsive design setup, for certain screen sizes, you hide something like the sidebar. And from our point of view, that's fine.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, John. Thank you.
Cool. OK, Joy.
Hi, John. I have two questions. Hopefully, it won't take up too much time. So the first is, does a portion of content...
It's really hard to hear you. Sorry. Can you perhaps speak closer to the microphone?
Is that better?
Yes, perfect.
Sorry about that. I have two questions that I hope won't take too much time. So does the portion of content created by a publisher matter? And I mean that in the sense of affiliate or maybe even sponsored content. Context is, there's a Digiday newsletter that went out today that mentioned that publishers were concerned that if you have, let's say, 40% of your traffic or content as commerce or affiliate, your website will become or considered by Google a deals website, and then your authority may be dinged a little bit. Is there such a thing that's happening in the ranking systems algorithmically?
I don't think we would have any threshold like that. Partially because it's really hard to determine a threshold like that. You can't, for example, just take the number of pages and say, this is this type of website because it has 50% pages like that, because the pages can be visible in very different ways. So sometimes you have a lot of pages that nobody sees, and it wouldn't make sense to judge a website based on something that essentially doesn't get shown to users.
And I guess this may be like a part B to that. How much does it matter if a publisher is outsourcing content for scalability reasons versus having content created by staff or staff writers?
I I don't think for the most part that we would differentiate. It's more about the quality of the content overall. So that's something where if you outsource the content and then you get good content back, then you publish that good content. So from that point of view, I wouldn't say that outsourced content versus in-house content is kind of different by definition when it comes to the overall quality.
How would you even know?
I don't know. Yeah.
I think there are ways that Google would pick that up, especially if you label that. I think that's pretty easy to pick up.
I contest that. If you're talking about Google understanding an employment contract at that point, if I've got a staff member sitting in my office full time or one sitting at home being paid by the hour, I don't see how you'd ever know who's written anything.
Fair enough.
I could be wrong. I have been before.
Yeah, I don't think. Yeah. I mean, it would be different if you're aggregating content from other sites. That's something which we could pick up on. But if it's really just someone in-house or someone from an agency writing the content for you, it's the content that you're publishing.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Cool. OK, let me take a break here and pause the recording. It's been good having you all here. Thank you all for joining. Thanks for submitting so many questions. I have a bit more time afterwards, so we can go through the millions of people with raised hands as well. And we can see what we end up with. Thanks for joining. If you're watching this on YouTube, you're welcome to join one of the next office hour Hangouts. We do these about weekly. Usually, I announce them a couple days ahead of time in the community section. You can drop your questions there, or you can watch out for the link and join us live if you'd like to. All right. And with that, let me find the button to pause.